excited to be here. We always do this hand thing. We like go up. We're like,
Dude,
we're
it's
here.
me. It's me.
I know. I got it for you. I just did it. I was like, that consilio thing, and it was happening. We're talking about brand today. We're going to be dropping kind of five strategies. It's going to be sort of organized, sort of not organized, but it's going to be very, very relevant. Is probably the best way to process it. I know a lot of you all, as you're building your therapy practice, really care about how it's perceived. Actually, we're talking a lot about this on our coaching call inside of our program today with a few of our practice owners. And there's some traps, there's some follies, there's some good things, but like, how do you build a brand? What are the important parts to zero in on that make this work? What are important in the early days? What are important in the late days once you've big or once you're starting to reach your goal? We're gonna try and unpack this a little bit. There's a lot here, but we're gonna do our best to put some stuff on the table that you can take away and take action on, whether you're a solo or whether you're a group. That's going to be really applicable all the way throughout as we're talking about this subject of brand and branding.
I might just really quick start us on when is the best time to work on your brand. And
Yeah.
maybe Josh, you and I have different answers on this. But the quick answer for me, the best time to work on your brand is kind of like in seasons. You don't want to just like always be focused on it. To me, it makes more sense to work on brand after you've just gone through a big transition in your practice, whether that's new hires or possibly like new systems that you have now in place, and you're like fundamentally a slightly different practice than maybe you were 3 or 6 months ago. And so that might be the season to take a little bit of time to realign and refocus your branding. I don't know. I don't know what you think about that.
I agree with that. And I just want to start off by saying, and we literally were just saying this before we went live, that a lot of times when you hear the word brand, you immediately think of the aesthetics. You think of the logo creation, you think of the website colors, you think of the images that show up, you think of your head, what's my brand? And there's some truth to that because that gives off the vibe potentially, right? That visual engagement for you and your brand and your practice name. However, all of that actually is accomplishing what brand truly is, and that's kind of our first big bucket, which is the experience. Ultimately, your brand is the experience that a client is potentially having with you. And there's a lot of phenomenal ways to create the feeling of your practice having a brand that does not rest on a website or on your logo or on your image or even your name, which tells us that brand transcends, and creating a great brand is far more than just those aesthetic elements.
Yeah, I think this was Story Brand or The Brand Gap, the book, but the description for brand is the gut feeling that someone gets when before they work with you, while they're working with you, and after they work with you.
Yeah.
And so this experience that you're creating is every touch point. It's not just the colors that they saw one time when they went to your website 2 or 3 times.
Yeah. And to just hit on this, for instance, like Attilio and I for 3, 4 years we didn't have a website in the space in a technical way. There was no website. In some ways, we didn't even really have like a formalized logo and other things because we focused on other parts of the brand experience, right? When someone hears what you do and how you do it, well, how do they feel about that? What are they going to go tell their husband, their wife, their friend, their referral? What's your brand to your doctors? What's your X, Y, and Z? And all of this works best when you have massive clarity on who you serve, what you do, and what you want your clients to perceive about you. And sometimes aesthetics are simply a way to help achieve that.
Yeah. Uh, and I just want to clarify the clarity piece. When Josh talks about clarity, we're not talking about like niching down necessarily. That can be helpful to get clear. But I think the clarity path is who are you serving? How do you serve them? What are the results that you want to deliver? How are you anticipating delivering those results? How can you ensure in some forms or fashion that the practice goals are in line with your client's goals? How can you, like, there's a lot of layers to this clarity piece. And quite frankly, when you're small, you just don't have that clarity. And so it makes it really, really hard to uh, have a good cohesive brand when you're small, because it's just unrealistic. And you see it oftentimes. A lot of businesses change their brand often, and so especially when they're small, and it's just because they didn't know. They didn't know
Yeah.
what they needed to know.
Yeah, I don't know if I have anything to add there other than to maybe ask the question for all of us. Well, great. How do I get more clarity? And I'm going to dig that question a little bit deeper and say, what are the places as I'm serving clients or preparing to serve clients that I can look for feedback on what my brand currently is and or could be, right?
Yeah, I think as far as like places to look, did you want me to answer that, or
Yes, yes. Let's answer the question.
yeah.
But
So
that's why we're here.
in places to look for like understanding the clarity, I think one is internal. Like, what do you actually know as the professional, as the business owner, as the visionary for the business and the practice that you want to provide? How is it that you want to serve? So look internally in a lot of these elements, and don't be afraid to kind of stick to your guns. I think sometimes we have the tendencies to look at like others around us and have that inform almost solely the direction that we should take, when in fact I'd encourage you maybe to look internally rather than externally in a lot of these circumstances. And then listen to your clients. Who are the people that are paying you? Who are the people that are coming to you? Who are the people that are advocating for you and giving you referrals? What are they saying about you? What are they saying in session? What are different angles that you can take to help create better concepts and continuity with them? What do your sales calls look like with your ideal clients? What happens during the support calls when people have to like reschedule or cancel, and like what are the issues that are coming up? So I think like listening intently throughout your entire business process with the people who are giving you cash or giving you votes of confidence, I think that's where you really find the best sources.
Yeah. And I want to zero in on the sales process specifically because I have some anecdotal evidence from the counseling practices we work with. Today, I was on a sales call with a counselor who's considering our program, and one of the reasons why he said he was excited for the conversation was because it felt like we practice what we preach. We do the things that we tell our counselors to do. And he's referencing a newsletter that was on a newsletter. You're getting a little meta here, but essentially it was like, oh, you guys do what you tell other people to do. And that's something that we care about. Like we want to be representative, that if we're going to tell someone to show up in a specific way, that we're willing to do it, or our team does it, or we have the experience to do it, and it's not a past thing, right? None of that has to do other than the experience of what they're reading and what they're perceiving about how we're acting in the assets that are public, our videos, our content, our newsletters, our website, whatever it is, right? A live conversation with me. And then also that excited. I've had people say, "Oh, I was excited to talk to you." Or they talk to us, "Oh, I have so much hope after reading your website." Or I'm really relieved that there's a process out here to show me how to do it or to help me build it in the way that you guys do it. And those emotional tones are fruits of a great process or of a great brand, because those emotional tones can carry weight across conversations and across the feeling, across the experience that a client's having with you. So if you're saying, man, how do I create a great brand? Maybe think about what are the primary emotional descriptions that you want a client to describe their interactions with you and your assets and your team on those rescheduled calls, in the sessions, on a sales call, right? It's like, well, do you want them to be relieved that they found you? Do you want them to be hopeful? Do you want them to feel supported? Do you want them to fill in the blank? Come up with some great key emotions And then ask yourself, great, what do I need to say? What do I need to do? And how do I need to show externally ourselves so that way clients get that impression that I want to create?
I might add one caveat to that.
Yeah.
And I think the caveat is deliver it the way that you want and that you think will support best. And then I think add one filter to it, and the filter just needs to be, is this actually what they want? Because sometimes I think we want to do something, whether it's because we think it's beneficial or whether it's because we being us, like the person who's delivering the service and stuff. I think sometimes we get in our heads and we want to do something that isn't necessarily the way that our clients want the thing done, and sometimes that's a detraction. Sometimes we have to learn through those points. So, like, for example, one thing might be like, I want to offer therapy services, but all of it is text message. No one ever does one-on-one sessions, and it's just a bunch of text conversations. And so maybe there's a market for it, maybe there's not a market for it. Maybe the reason we're doing it is because we want people to feel supported, or because we don't want like the like conflict or face to face issues coming up. And so maybe there's like a good reason why we do it, but maybe that's not how the clients actually want it done.
Yeah.
And so what ends up happening is we end up not making good progress towards towards the gut feeling.
And to show a really direct example of this, I want to zero in on the voicemails of therapists. That's actually a really big place to communicate a flavor of yourself, right? They're listening to your voice and they're listening to whatever ever you're saying. And a lot of you have, I've listened to literally thousands of these voicemails in the last 6 years making these calls. So I probably know more than a lot of people in terms of what's being said. And most of them sound the same of like, I'll try and reach back out to you in 24, 48 hours, blah, blah, blah. And, if you're in need, please call 911. Some version of that, right? And that's an example of, well, does the client actually want to be followed up with in the next 24 to 48 hours? And you communicating that, like, does that serve them best? How do they feel about you when you share that piece of information? Do they feel good? They're like, oh, great, they're gonna probably get back with me in the next day or two. Or do they feel bad? Oh man, I have to wait a whole day or two just to maybe get a return phone call. And shockingly, that's how more clients feel. Like when you survey clients, they are not a fan of receiving that. A better response, a better way to do that, if you don't want clients to have that reaction, is like, hey, shoot me a text or go find our online scheduler. And if you're in need, call 911, right? Like, just don't, a different set of words, right? Create a whole different experience. And the counselor thinks that's real, that serves them best, right? Oh, that gives me time to respond to people and like follow up in the next day or two, right? It seems totally fair.
Or the
But
perception of busy.
right, right. The client doesn't want to be served like that. So even if it still does take you a day or two to follow up with them, using different language can provide a different feeling about that waiting period for them to hear back from you.
Yeah.
I think all of that was under point one of experience here, but I think it's the most pertinent. It's what unpacks and pulls out a lot of this question about where do we start around building a brand. But the next one is time, leveraging time on two fronts. Number one, building a great brand takes time. And there's a couple of reasons for this. Tilio likes to talk about this in a lot of different segments, but the feedback loop, and you even mentioned it earlier, so I want to tee this back up to you of saying building a great brand requires changes, iterations, listening to things, and going back to it. Like, what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, it takes time, guys. Like like really, 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 when it comes down to it, is like the nature of building something incredible, the nature of receiving feedback, taking action on that feedback again, receiving feedback again, taking action, receiving feedback. It's just is going to take time, and so I think don't take it so serious. Maybe is the catchphrase for this bullet point, is like, it takes time. you're going to eventually get to all of the amazing brand things that you want to do, and just maybe come to terms with and have some peace around the scenario that it takes time.
Yeah.
And I might just segue into maybe the second component for time here, and that's just it takes time to build trust. I'll let you
Yeah.
touch on that.
I was going to say the biggest thing with building trust, which is kind of one of our next big categories, is trust should be a huge part of your brand. Trust in terms of having a consistent experience, right? You show up to Starbucks and you trust you're going to have the same experience you have at the Starbucks down the street. So that's a huge part of trust. And then also a huge part of the brand in terms of trust is trusting you're going to get the result that you want, right? I'm going to get the Starbucks tasting cup of coffee, right? And you can accomplish the same thing, but that requires you to service people. It requires you to have enough volume of leads coming in that follow through on the same process and experience the same thing. And enough people attending your sessions and enough people referring you for that to build up over time, but also for you to become a consistent person, for you to find out the things that need to be consistent versus the things that don't serve you and your clients best, to get rid of them so they're no longer a part of your consistent process. And especially when you're launching business for the first time, or you launched your group practice and you're trying to provide services, but through the lens of not yourself sitting in the chair, but 5 clinicians sitting in the chair for the first time. Those are things that it's a little bit of trial and error. It's this feedback loop of like, what was this week? What was this month? It takes time to build trust. And then trust kind of goes with results. You have to leverage results. One of the best ways to build your brand is to figure out how to communicate the results or the likelihood that clients can achieve results with you. Because nothing will build more trust, nothing will build more desire for experience with you than people thinking they're going to get a great cup of coffee. They're going to get a good, healthy therapy session with you and your team.
Yeah, when it comes down to, I think all therapists want to know how to create like referrals, right? How do I get referrals for my practice? How do I get advocates built within my practice? When it comes to building advocates, it comes down to client experience and the results that you're generating for those clients. So some people are going to have a great experience with you, but they never get results. And so for that reason, they may not ever refer out,
Yeah.
and then some people on the other side of the spectrum get great results, but they had a terrible experience with you, and so they won't
Yeah.
become an advocate for your practice. And so this results and client experience kind of mesh is the thing that leads people up to actually becoming an advocate for you. And these are like the big core pillars to your brand, right?
Yeah.
It's the experience and the results that you're able to get. And then can you point to it? Like, can you use data? Can we emotionally, like, what are emotional buyers looking at for our brand? What are logical buyers looking at for our brand? And then how do all of these things marry together
Yeah.
for them in those cases?
So we've gone through experience, time, results, trust, and the last one we want to end on is beauty, is the aesthetics, right? Okay. And earlier today we used the analogy of a cake, like baking a cake. If there's a really nice, beautiful, attractive cake, it does up the ante and desire to maybe try it out because you're like, oh man, that looks incredible. But if you taste it and it tastes terrible, well, the point of the cake is just utterly defeated, right? Which is why we can't start with aesthetics as the point of brand if we've built none of the other qualities or the experience or the trust needed, because you're going to turn away more people, because you're going to service more people, because you're going to attract more people from a pretty brand, but then you're going to have negative feedback in the marketplace. The bad reviews, the reverse referral psychology that just does damage to you, your process, and your brand, right? So we got to start with the good stuff. Does the cake taste good? And then we can get to aesthetics. And as we think about aesthetics, I think the first place I want to hit is just headshots. This is the number one thing for you and your practice owners that I would encourage you to care about. It's worth the $2,000 to $1,000, maybe more, depending on how crazy you get with this, to get a really decent headshot that one, you're proud of, and two, looks good on the internet because all of your listing sites, your websites, everything else is really image dependent in this process, in this industry. So I just think that we can't go anywhere else without like hitting that one first as a big necessity.
Yeah, I think beyond headshots, because yeah, that I mean, a picture describes 1,000 words, right? A picture's 1,000 words. Look at your video quality. So what setup do you have? Maybe is some of the next components or some subsection of headshots. But then I think maybe after that, I think just like in general, maybe like colors and maybe like web design. I think if you have a website, this might be the place to like take just a little bit of extra time. But of course, like Josh said, this is not the time. Like, make sure that the cake is a functioning and tasty cake before you move into aesthetics. So don't try to make your cake the first time. Have it taste amazing and look amazing. We want to make sure that the thing works and tastes really good before we start layering on all this extra aesthetic stuff. So I
Yeah.
think just like the actual like function and form of the site is probably the next most important component for me.
And when we're talking about brand, especially website in this day and age, less is more, guys. Busy logos, busy websites, giant monstrosity of written pages. Like that's what will make it feel really funky and non-aesthetic, fast and quick. So short, punchy, straightforward, clean. Like those are going to be the things that are A, easier to create for you or for your team, but also be the things that will eventually have a longer shelf life just with how trends are and trends are going. And on the website piece specifically, on just an aesthetic comment, um, stock images look good on their own, but when you have a site full of them, they don't serve the purpose you probably want them to serve. So that's where real life images that you've taken or other things, we're actually finding a way to keep a smaller site. So you have to have less just like blunt stock imagery. The market is so saturated with those things that if we can avoid just massive stock imagery dump all across your website because it looks good and there's people laughing and there's the person holding their hands in their face, right? Like, I don't think that that's serving you maybe as much as you think it is, even if it like sort of looks good.
Yeah, I want to. I agree. I also think navigation, like
Okay.
the unsung hero, just to append to what you were just
Mm,
saying, navigation is like how easily can people access the information that they want to access at any given
yep.
time on your site, and I think
Yep.
that goes into like clarity and some of the other things.
Yeah.
Maybe the final point for me might be just copy. Like, what are you like? How are you representing yourself in your language? How are you representing your experience in your language that you're using? Whether that's on listing sites or Google or your website or your Site Today profiles, or is it aligned with your brand, with your values, with who you serve, with how you serve, and is it clear, concise, and effective?
Yeah. And I hear the voice that's in my head as Attilio is saying, it's like, okay, but like, how do you do that? So a couple quick last recommendations as we wrap up our time here of like, well, how do you actually do this? Number one, building a great brand is a very large, in theory, monstrous process. So the true how to do it is you do it in little, little, little tiny steps, and you improve it in little, little tiny steps. It's always a joke that I say with a lot of people, like I kind of hate my website right now. But the thing is, I hated it 3 years ago, and I hate it today, and I'll hate it tomorrow, no matter how much work I do on it, because there's always things to work on it. If any of you are homeowners, I'm going through some like home remodels right now. It's kind of the same stuff. Oh, that needs to be done, and that needs to be done, right? So you can't do it all. There are chunks to get more done. To Tilio's comment at the start of our live, it's like seasonal, right? If you have more time, if you have more changes, do a lot of work on it. If you have less time, kind of let some things flow for a little bit. But maybe what this looks like is a weekly time in your calendar where you just go through some copy or images, and it's just a time that you visit weekly or time you visit monthly to say, hey, this is brand building time. This is asset developing time, and just put a habit in place there. But then also, whether it's copy or other places, look outside the therapy industry is one of my best tips of like, what are people in other service industries, doctors' offices, dentists, chiropractors, whatever it is, what are they doing that feel like our best brand practices? And then, yeah, some internal as well, and see if you can recreate it. See if you can play around with it. Especially when we're talking about aesthetics, Canva is an incredibly powerful tool. It's very easy to use if you've never done graphic design before. And then with copy, like get feedback, get help. That's my biggest thing is if you're struggling to figure out how to communicate yourself in written or in form and function, get someone's perspective that's developed that stuff before to pull that out of you. Because one of the things we see a lot in our program is the counselors have the answers for how they want their brand to be built, but they just needed sort of the prompts, the questions to pull it out of them, get it on paper, get their mind on paper, right? And let it come to life for the first time in a way that feels effective for them.
Yeah, I think my closing point might just be on um, the best businesses in the world rebrand.
Hmm.
So it's what you have now is not the end. It's exactly your point on the website. You know exactly what you're just saying. It's a work in progress. The best businesses in the world take the time to rebrand, get their new visuals updated, and they go through these big processes. Obviously, if you're smaller, don't take that much time and resources and energy to do it. Because I mean, some of the biggest businesses in the world, they're spending millions of dollars just on their one logo or something like that, their one logo redesign and the theory around it and all that stuff. So, guys, don't treat yourself like you're the Pepsis of the world that need massive rebranding or big projects or anything like that. If you're not a Pepsi just yet, if you are a Pepsi, maybe consider a big $1 million project. But keep that in mind. The biggest businesses in the world change these items. They even change their names sometimes. So don't don't feel like anything is set in stone,
Yeah.
and have some fun with it. Get the data. Know that it takes time. Know that you're
Yeah.
here to build trust, and building trust takes time. Getting information takes time. Getting results takes time. All these things, they take a lot of time, a lot of energy, and a lot of revision.
Yeah, for sure. And we've done this ourselves. We've rebranded, we've renamed, right? We weren't
Yep.
always called Therapy Flow. And don't do too much Googling to find out what we were called before that. No. Um, but yeah, great ending note. Nothing set in stone. It's a living life document, the brand for your business.